Hello, everybody, and welcome back to FilmograFeed, our show where we break down somebody's filmography and their ups and their downs and their don't look now. I am once again your host, Kaleb Boatman, and with me, as always, with a new hair color, is Kaleb Koho.
Yes, I am
Koho,
red.
how are you
I've
doing?
become red. I'm feeling good. Yes, I am now red, and will be for the foreseeable future. I will be red in California, which will be fun. But I will say I already, just to get the cleaning thoughts out of the way, had way more fun with this week than I did last week.
That is fair. Well, you alluded to it. Our movie this week is Young Sherlock Holmes. We're still doing Barry Levinson. Barry Levinson's third film, coming off of The Natural, as Young Sherlock Holmes. Let's just jump right into it. This is a film that is looking at Sherlock Holmes and Watson. Would you say early high school?
Yeah,
Maybe
like
middle school?
somewhere in their early high school lives, they're adolescent. And I think
Yeah.
the movie goes super far out of its way to the point where there's block text at the beginning and block text at the end to say, hey, this is an original Sherlock Holmes story, not based on any Sherlock Holmes material. And I wonder if that has something to do with like it being so like, I don't know if that's like a thing they had to do with Sherlock Holmes stuff, like originally, or up to the point where it fully became public domain. Maybe it's because it was like freshly public domain and they were like, hey, Arthur Conan Doyle no longer is like, his estate doesn't have control on this character anymore. So we're going to do this random story.
It probably is something like that because, like, the Sherlock Holmes stories. Well, I don't know if it is that though, because the Sherlock Holmes stories. Do you remember, like, not that long ago, there was the lawsuit with the movie Enola Holmes?
Yeah,
Where because of the way Sherlock was portrayed in that, like Arthur Conan Doyle's estate sued that like they were portraying him in ways that weren't public domain. So I'm not sure if like there are still some stuff that isn't public domain. I'm wondering, well, is that in 1985 was any Sherlock Holmes thing public domain yet? But
I'm looking at it right now. Apparently, it has nothing to do with that, and entirely to do with Chris Columbus apparently being really scared about Sherlock Holmes fans being offended by him not doing a Sherlock Holmes story, like doing an original story. Like, he thought the movie was going to be such a fuck you to like Sherlock Holmes fans that he needed to like clarify that this was like with the most love for Sherlock Holmes, which makes me wonder, were like Sherlock Holmes fans of the 80s these Star Wars fans of today? Like, were they just like on toxic like newspaper columns being like, you fucked with, this isn't my Sherlock Holmes?
I'm just imagining all the 80s. Sure, like there weren't even that many Sherlock Holmes movies in the 80s. And like the only other one I can think of is Without a Clue, which would make fans way more mad than this movie does. Because you know what Without a Clue is, right?
I don't. I have no idea.
That's the one with Michael Caine and Ben Kingsley, where it's basically Sherlock Holmes is an idiot, and Ben Kingsley, who is Watson, is the real one solving.
Oh, see, I'm actually super into the idea of that movie.
I've never seen it. I'm also very into that.
I'm very into that. But I wonder if, like, I think it might have something to do with, like, oh, you made Sherlock Holmes young. I would, like, kill to, like, I wonder who Chris Columbus was scared of. If there was just, like, a secret society of Holmes academics in Los Angeles that were just leaving him notes being like, if you fuck up Sherlock Holmes, I swear to God, if you don't put Basil Rathbone in this, it's not Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, no, I have no idea because, again, it's not like there were that many Sherlock Holmes things in the 80s.
It's just so weird to me.
It is very weird. Well, anyway, let's jump into the movie. So this movie opens with so background here. Koho had never seen this until we did it for this episode.
Yeah,
I saw this movie as a kid, but I didn't really remember anything about it. I had like a few images of memory, but I didn't remember anything about it. So last night I put this on, and the opening scene happens. And I watched the opening scene, and just something unlocks within my brain because Koho, back me up here. The opening scene of this movie is awesome, but terrifying.
Oh, no. This was like, I remember I messaged you as soon as the opening happened. I think this is one of the most unique openings to a movie I think I've ever seen, where it's like absolutely riding the most precise line, where it is too scary. It's so that it's not too scary that you're like frightened, but also not too slapsticky that you're laughing. Like, it's like right in the middle, where it's like just funny enough where you're like nervous laughing, but just scared enough that you don't know if you should be laughing. And it puts you in the exact tone of where this movie is going to take you.
No, I think that's exactly right. But as a kid, this scarred me for life, because for those who don't remember, this movie opens with a guy eating a turkey. Somebody shoots a thing at him, and he's eating the turkey, and then the turkey like comes alive and starts attacking him.
But no one else can see it.
And no one else can see it because it's a hallucination, as revealed later on in the movie. But like, it's that turkey is like freaky, and all of the, because I think to kind of jump ahead of ourselves a little bit, the main villains of this movie are using hallucinogenic darts.
They're scarecrowing people. They're scarecrowing people from Batman.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Using hallucinogenic darts to cause nightmares in their victims that end up making them kill themselves.
Living nightmares that drive them to suicide. And it's the most gruesome mode of death I've seen in any form of Sherlock Holmes fiction. Like, absolutely insane.
No doubt about it. And Koho backed me up.
Even Nolan wouldn't go as far as this movie did, and he did the real Scarecrow in Batman Begins.
That's true. Back me up here, though. All of the like the nightmare hallucination sequences in this are great.
Fantastically done. I think Industrial Light and Magic worked on this. I mean, this movie got a visual effects Oscar nomination for a very valid reason.
This was, from what I understand, according to Wikipedia anyway, this was the first movie to have a completely CGI character, and it would be the Stained Glass Knight is the first character.
He does not look great.
Completely made of CGI.
He does not look great, but he does not look bad. It's that thing where it's like he's early CGI.
I say the same thing about these effects that I would say about something like Toy Story, in that you're not allowed to really criticize them all that much, because at the end of the day,
they had nothing to go on
first. They did it first before everybody else.
It's funny that you mentioned Toy Story, because Toy Story, when they made that movie, one of the deciding influences on them making Toy Story is young Sherlock Holmes. It's one of their influences on the creation of Toy Story.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Straight up. You can look into it. They're like they cite this as one of the movies that they looked to make Toy Story because of their fully CGI night. It's like one of the, like, they looked to Industrial Light and Magic and how they did that. And that's like, I think that's nuts. Like, that's really cool. Like, you'll like see, like, there's direct parallels between young Sherlock Holmes and Toy Story in terms of like technology, which is really cool.
I did not know that, but that's really interesting. But yeah, I think all of the nightmare sequences.
I went down a young Sherlock Holmes rabbit hole after I watched this movie.
That's fair. All the nightmare sequences are great, but move on then. We focused on Watson, which I think,
who is played by Alan Cox, who is the son of who, Boat? That is Brian Cox's son.
That's
Brian Cox's son who plays Watson in this movie. The son of William Stryker and Hannibal Lecter is the star of young Sherlock Holmes, the Watson.
That's kind of amazing, because this kid is like the most un-Brian Cox kid ever. Koho, you're kind of echoing a little bit. You might want to turn your mic down a little bit. But yeah, no, this kid is like, I love Watson in this. Watson is like such an absolute dork of a kid in this, and I absolutely love him.
Yeah, I love Watson in this so much. I think that Watson in this is like really well done. Is like, as a character, the way they bring him into like the adolescent situation as like this really, they just make him like a freshman. He's just like your everyday freshman in high school type. And he's just like so nerdy and introverted and has no idea, like a shell of a kid. And like Holmes, who is like the biggest dick ever, is the one that's just like, hey, open up, you dumb bitch, but I like you. And those two end up like having really great chemistry between Nicholas Rowe and Alan Cox.
No, I would completely agree. I think that this I think one thing that is kind of necessary to every Sherlock Holmes story, but I think it's important, even though pretty much every Sherlock Holmes story does it, which is keep things on Watson's perspective. Sherlock is your main character, but everything goes through Watson's perspective so that we still have the kind of human codifier to bounce off of Holmes, who is this larger than life figure.
Right, and not only just the humanity, but the intelligence level. If you're following Holmes and you see everything from Holmes' perspective, you're not going to understand what you're seeing, which is why Watson is necessary to just the function and the format of a Sherlock Holmes story, because they are the audience insert character.
The funniest thing about the Watson kid, this kid is probably, what, 14, 15?
Alan Cox was probably like 15 when he made this movie.
Okay. Say this kid is 14, 15. Kid is so focused and concerned about his medical career.
Yeah.
Like, he is this is going to jeopardize my medical career, which is hilarious.
It's hilarious, but I also want to give a huge shout out. So, like, I don't think we said this up top, but Chris Columbus wrote the screenplay, which is nuts. Which this movie has a very Harry Potter Hogwartsy feel to it, not in the sense of like, oh, magical brooms, but the dynamic of all these kids like interacting feels very much like when Harry gets to Hogwarts for the first time. And I know Columbus didn't write that, but like it's the same sort of vibe. And like I think that Columbus does a great job with this script. You can tell how much he loves Sherlock Holmes. And so by doing Young Sherlock Holmes, the prequel, the origin story, the alternate universe origin story of Sherlock Holmes, he like gets to set up and play with and tease the Sherlock Holmes that we know is coming. And like the medical history, like the medical career being in the future is the funniest running joke, because you know he'll never actually, like, he'll get it, but he'll abandon it to come back to Holmes. Like, and like all the little pieces where it's like Lestrade and Holmes being like not friendly to each other in this movie, but you know they'll be good friends later. And like all the different people going back and forth, and like even down to the thing that happens at the very, very end. It's just like
we'll save that.
We'll save that. We'll save that.
We're gonna end on that because that's like
we'll save that. But he loves Sherlock Holmes, and that just echoes through this entire movie.
No, I would completely agree. I think that we'll kind of move on now. So a good chunk of this, at least the good chunk of the first part of the movie, I like, because it's just kind of, it lets the kids be kids a little bit before we get into the main mystery. And we see Sherlock, who we haven't really talked about. Nicholas Rowe, is that his name?
Nicholas Rowe, yeah.
Nicholas Rowe. We haven't, so we'll talk about how we feel about his performance.
A legend at just being like, he captures exactly what the title suggests. He is a young Sherlock Holmes. Like, I think he does a great job of being that I am smarter than you. I know more than you. I perceive the entire world around both of us differently. And I know everything about you by looking at the fibers on your jacket. And he wears that on his face in a way an adult Sherlock Holmes typically doesn't, unless it's the Robert Downey Jr. version. He like just wears it with this like the corners of his mouth are almost always ready to go into his shit-eating grin of him just being like, I'm better than you, suck it. And he just, that mentality, you could just see all the adults around him fucking hate him for it. Like almost all the adults are like, this kid just sucks. And like, I love every time he gets to dress down one of the professors at the school where he's just like, no, like when he has the vase in his hand to solve that mystery, the first puzzle, he's like, this antique vase. He's like, not the antique vase. This antique vase, drops it and then just pulls out the trophy. And he's just like, I got it, bitch. And it's just like the best. He's so good. And like, then he also has those moments where he gets to be human, where an adult Sherlock Holmes rarely gets those moments. Like on the show with Benedict Cumberbatch, he gets some of those moments sometimes. But like, he rarely gets those moments to have the level of emotion that he has, like in the relationship with, I totally blanked on her name, Elizabeth, the relationship he sort of has with Elizabeth, that dynamic, and like the relationship he has with Watson, where he has those moments where he's like, nah, this is my friend, fuck you. And have that all break down into just this very like emotional, like when people around him die or people around him leave, you see it on his face, you see it affect him, but he acts like Sherlock Holmes would about it, where he's like, no, I can't focus, move on. But like, because he's younger, you see that reaction more strongly.
No, I think that's absolutely the case. And I think it's also, this is a character who I think if he just plays him with about 5% more cockiness, we hate this performance.
Oh, yeah.
We hate this performance. He is like, it is honestly a tightrope act watching this performance, because he always steps up to the line of just being too cocky to be likable, but he never crosses it, because you still like him. But that performance, you give that to a kid who doesn't know how to do it, he could absolutely be the most insufferable performance in that.
And I think the other thing that Chris Columbus smartly does with the script is that he gives us a lot of reasons to root for Sherlock, where it's like he can be that cocky prick, but all the people around him clearly don't like him to a degree where they're almost mean to him. And so he's allowed to be cocky back to them because he gives us a reason to watch Sherlock, to berate this person, because we're like, oh, Sherlock might be a dick, but this guy's a really like rude human being.
And speaking of that, let's talk about the most punchable character in this movie, who has a Harry Potter name. It's Dudley. Dudley, Sherlock's school rival, who is just the worst.
That is the moment where I like put the Harry Potterness of it all together, because that character is the Draco Malfoy.
Yeah, it's the Draco.
Like, he's doing proto Draco as a character, and is literally
he kind of looks like Tom Felton a little bit.
He does look a little bit like Tom Felton, and he has the hair slicked back like him too. And it's just like the moment he steps up to Sherlock, that's the moment where it's like, was Sherlock a little like whatever to Watson? I mean, yeah, but like that's just how he says hello. But like, if you didn't like him off the introduction, that scene where we meet Dudley and Holmes confronts him is the moment you love Holmes, because that's the moment where Sherlock gets to like actually show off like how smart he is, but also how good of a person he is, because he like defends Watson and destroys the kid, and you're just like, God damn.
And that kind of goes into, I love the little game they set up to kind of just establish Holmes' deductive abilities, to kind of give us something for him to do before we get into the main mystery, which is Dudley's issued a challenge. You got to find the trophy. I think that's a super fun sequence. And then how he figures it out that the trophy was essentially baked into a vase, I think is so cool.
I think that entire segment is like delightful, where you like, and it also gives you a reason to like, it also serves functionally as the scene that gives you the full scope of how smart a young Sherlock Holmes is, also what the shortcomings of a young Sherlock Holmes is, and also exactly the kind of challenges this kid is already ready to face at this point in the story when we meet him, and also give him a challenge that like is low stakes enough but shows him in his element, where you're like, okay, this is who this person is as a like storytelling function, while also giving us a reason to root for him in a position where failure, if you didn't like this character, would be a great thing. But it's the moment where we get to like really rally behind Holmes and fully be like, yep, this is our guy, because the teacher's so mean to him during this challenge, where he like literally is betting on him to lose with another teacher. Yeah. It's like you're like, okay, now I really want this guy to win.
And then coming off of that victory, we get like the most frustrating point in this movie, where Holmes is taking a test and Dudley drops a cheat sheet. Holmes does the nice thing and tries to give it back to him. and Holmes gets busted for cheating, even though he wasn't cheating.
Right.
And like you can tell, all the professors hating him so much absolutely had something to do with him getting expelled.
Oh yeah. And like off the back of that, it's like that moment where you're like, well, come on. You like that also helps a lot in the smoothing over of the like, do we like Holmes or not? Like they at this point it's like we're invested, we're in. And so we're gonna punch you in the gut for liking Holmes. Where it's like now that you care, we're gonna make you feel really bad for Sherlock Holmes.
And I obviously, I think part of that was to kind of put Holmes on his back feet a little bit, give him a disadvantage. And I love the little punch he gives to Dudley before he leaves of making all the hair white. That's a fun little moment. But then that's what gets us into the actual mystery because Elizabeth's uncle, who works at the school, I think he's like a groundskeeper or kind of what's his thing?
Rupert is I think he's I don't really know. He might be.
I don't think he made it entirely clear. It said he works.
But you like already love this guy from like 3 or 4 quick interactions where you like the flying.
You love him. No, you love him from his introduction. His introduction is literally him coming in on the flying machine, the Da Vinci style flying machine.
Which is dope. That's the first moment in the movie, like outside of like, I mean, the turkey's the first real moment where you're like visual effects, but like some of that's still practical. Whereas this is like the first point where you're like, oh, this is why this got nominated for the Oscar. This thing actually still looks really good.
Yeah. No, that is super fun. And this guy is fun, so you feel bad when he gets killed.
This guy is played by Nigel Stock, who was Watson in the 60s on the TV show.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes, he was Watson in the 60s Sherlock Holmes TV show. And I found that out when I was doing my rabbit hole dive. And I was like starting to be like, how many of the people that they like stacked the supporting cast with are ex Sherlock Holmes like alumni playing totally new original supporting roles? And there's I think there's maybe 1 or 2 more, but I think that's the big one.
No, that's really interesting. But yeah, so what's the character's name?
They call him Wax Flatter because that's his last name, but
Wax Flatter.
Rupert.
So Wax Flatter's killed, and Holmes knows that it was not just an accident, and he had already suspected the 2 other suicides were not really just suicides. So this is kind of what puts Holmes on the case, working with Elizabeth to try to find this out. And, of course, Watson. And they find the blow dart and yada, yada, yada. I think we can kind of skip ahead to them figuring out that there's this cult. What?
Like, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, we can basically, like, we don't want to give away what the mystery, like, is, because the actual mystery...
we can talk...
we'll talk about what it is. But what I'm saying is...
know what the mystery is.
Right, but what I'm saying is we don't have to detail bit by bit them figuring it out. But I think the actual constructed... this is the mystery, which I saw was a lot of people's criticisms with the movie, I think is really strong. Like, I don't think it has to be this incredibly elaborate mystery of like, this equals this equals this. The way the movie does it is it's like Sherlock just solves what I would consider to be a very difficult puzzle for an adolescent Sherlock Holmes, but an adult Sherlock Holmes would probably put this together in half the time of a short story. But he's a young Sherlock Holmes. So it's like, I feel like it makes sense for the whole movie to be like, all right, figuring this out and this out and this out, and connecting the dots of how this mystery comes together. And it's really entertaining, like to follow along with how they do it.
Eventually it's revealed that this is all part of a cult named the Ramatep. And this gets us to the best nightmare sequence in the movie, where all 3 of the kids stumble upon kind of the headquarters for Ramatep. And all 3 of them have their own weird sequences. Watson's is funny weird. His
is just odd. It's like an odd, like, you're not like totally freaked out by what Watson's going through.
I think it's fun.
But you're like kind of it's the nice relief from the other 2, because the other 2 are fucking nightmare fuel.
Sherlock's is like depressing and dark weird.
Oh, it's that weird. It's sad. His is like sad.
His is sad. Elizabeth's is the scariest scene in the entire movie.
It's that thing where you're like, Barry, do you remember who your audience is? Like, because you're like, is this supposed to be a kids movie? Is this supposed to be an adult movie? Because that's the point where they're walking the same line as they do in the beginning. But like, because there's 3, I think he got away with a lot more on Elizabeth's because they're worried about the other 2.
I think that's absolutely true. But anyway, through a series of more investigations, Holmes is able to figure out that the person behind all of this is his fencing professor. How do we feel about this guy? Because I'll be honest.
Are we talking about the performance of Anthony Higgins or just the character?
I'd say both.
Okay. You go ahead. You were starting to say something.
Well, no, I don't know how I feel about him. Because at the end of the day, I don't know. I feel like this could have been a better villain.
No, it absolutely could have. I think the villain's actually the only thing holding this movie back from being a great thing, because I think that I think the villain itself, the motivation for it is a strong motivation, and his plan of him, like the way they describe it, where it's like, this guy is looking, it's just a familial village-wide revenge thing that he's trying to come back for, where he's like, I want retribution. And like, it's an elaborate plan, which like,
that's the thing, is it's just a standard revenge plan. I'd be fine with that. I'll be honest, I don't love all the cult stuff that goes along with it. I think that feels kind of convoluted, and
I think that the cult thing is a note from Spielberg and the studio, coming directly off of the first 2 Indiana Jones movies.
This absolutely feels like Temple of Doom. Absolutely.
Yeah, this ending is very much
Temple of Doom.
They were making this movie during the release of Temple of Doom, so and Spielberg is the producer, so I definitely feel like they were at this like bit where they were like, oh, we're gonna take that Mola Ram, like the Mola Ram sequence was one of the most exciting things that they had in film in '84, apparently, even though I think that movie's bad. And they're like, hey, let's rip those action sequences out of that movie and like make our own version of that for Victorian England in the 3rd act of. And it's the one thing I don't love about the movie, but like I think that at the end,
I think the 3rd act completely kind of brings. You like this more than me. I like it. I think the 3rd act is absolutely what brings the movie down for me. I think all the stuff with the cult stuff, and I think this villain could have been I think that it's kind of my problem with twist villains in general, is I think it's hard to do a twist villain because it's hard to make your villain charismatic and interesting if they have to be hiding who they are the entire time. And I don't think when he's the professor, they do. I do like his dynamic with Holmes, and I wish they would have played on that a little bit, because I do like his kind of friendship with Holmes, and I wish they would have played on that a little bit more.
What my one amendment is I agree. I think they should have done what they basically do in Treasure Planet, where it's like that guy gets to be that teacher gets to be the only teacher in the school who apparently understands Holmes. And if you make him the only one that likes Holmes, supports Holmes,
make him basically his father figure.
Right. And you have that moment, like, give us that moment during the explanation where he's the only one that's like, no, why would he get expelled? He didn't do anything wrong. Mm-hmm. And you have him constantly standing up for Holmes. So then at the end, when it's like the professor who did it, it's going to have an even bigger emotional impact on Holmes because it's the one guy he trusted. And that then informs future Holmes's distrust of any sort of person getting close to him. I think it would have been a great decision, a better fix, but I think that maybe that stuff either was, I don't know if that was ever a thing, maybe it was just an oversight, but like I think that Higgins' performance is unrealized. It's nothing to do with his performance. I think his performance is good. I think there's a lot there that he was trying to give to that role, but they didn't write for him. It's an underdeveloped part, and I think the whole cult thing doesn't quite come together that way. But I think that the 3rd act, once we get out of the cult room and we go out into the streets, and it's Holmes versus Higgins and the other 3, that's when it becomes really thrilling and really engaging and really emotionally impactful. And I think if you cut the cult stuff out and maybe played with that, I think the twist villain thing would have worked better if you had established him as a better character before the twist. And I think that would have worked really well. But yeah, that's the one thing that like I knocked this movie on, is that the villain isn't as strong as it could have been.
No, I agree completely. But yeah, then as you kind of alluded to it, then we get the pretty good
Out on the docks.
climax scene where Elizabeth dies, which honestly,
gut punch.
Yeah.
Like when her uncle died, I already was choking up earlier in the movie. Like when he's laying there in the snow and he's just like choking through the dark trying to talk to them. I'm like already choking up in my room watching this, like, fuck you, movie. But then the end, when she gets shot and Holmes holds her and he's like, I'll see you in another world, a better world. I start weeping. I actually started crying. I was like, this movie made me care so much about Holmes, this version of Holmes, and also this relationship in a way that I wasn't expecting, where it was like, I was just like, yeah, you know, they're just like kids. They're like, whatever. There's no way they're going to end up together. She'll be frivolously thrown aside at the end, whatever. And the movie's like, no, this is his actual true love. And we're going to kill her before he can ever realize that and end it short and like traumatize this child for life. And I was just like, my God, movie. What a choice.
Yeah. No, like super bold. I can't really think of another like kids adventure movie where one of the main kids is killed off.
Yeah, and like killed in the third act by the villain, which is what actually elevates I think his character's name is actually Wraith. Actually like elevates him a bit for me, which is like the whole thing of the cult didn't love. But once he gets out there, he like kills Elizabeth. It like elevates him up to this to this point where I'm like, I can buy you as being like a Holmes villain, like an actually like on the level of Sherlock Holmes intellectual who is like fucking with him physically and mentally and like not afraid to rip everything away from him. And I'm like, oh my God, like dark as shit. And then Holmes comes after him with the sword and they have that like actual like, hey, fencing teacher to fencing student. And he's like fucking around with him while they're sword fighting, where he's like wrong foot for him, kicks him over. It's like nuts. It's like really well done.
It's a fun climax. Then once the villain gets away and everything is right, then I think we get a nice ending scene with Watson and Holmes.
I cried again at the ending. I don't know if I was just in a really emotional mood, but this movie like hit me. Because then the ending, not like 5 minutes after the movie ripped my heart out over the like Elizabeth's death, the movie rips my heart out again, where he's like the older Holmes or the older Watson narration, where he's like, and they say goodbye, whatever, he goes off, and he's like, somehow I knew I'd be seeing the Sherlock Holmes again, or like or he says something like, somehow I just knew that my life my life had a lot more mystery left in it, and undoubtedly that mystery would have lead me back to Sherlock Holmes. And the music swells, and young Sherlock Holmes comes up on screen, and it cuts to footage and credits, and I'm like shivering in my room with like the like chills of like, oh my God, great ending. I love the end of this movie. I think it's like a great, like, hey, this is the Sherlock Holmes origin story, and now these characters are in place to go do the shit they do before we get a study in Scarlet.
No, I agree. This is a really nice ending. And then
the credits
start happening.
The credits was really weird. Just this footage of a carriage in snow. I was like, what am I watching?
Yeah, no, it's a footage of a carriage in snow. And somebody, we can't tell who, the carriage pulls into like an inn. Somebody walks in, says, you need to sign your name. Guy puts pen to paper. Moriarty, pan up, and it's Wraith. Like, I know we were talking about how Wraith is the best villain, but that moment is so hype.
Looks directly at the camera and just raises one eyebrow. And it's the most campy, silly tag at the end of your movie that absolutely is supposed to set up a sequel and set up the future. And honestly, I think that actually makes the villain better, like the third act a little bit better, where when you realize this character is like underbaked or underdeveloped, and you're like, I don't really know why they couldn't just make a better villain. And then you realize this movie is also the origin story for Moriarty, and that moment and that encounter is what's going to inspire this person to become Moriarty, to get better and destroy Sherlock Holmes. It's like a really interesting thing where you're like, okay, so this like simpler plot and like killing people and like this weird ending, all is like the inspiration and origin to set up one of the greatest literary villains of all time's entire career, fighting one of the greatest literary heroes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It gets you hyped. Like, even if it's a little campy, that ending gets you hyped.
Very cheesy, very fun though. I enjoyed it.
No, very hype ending. So that was Young Sherlock Holmes. Koho, final thoughts on the movie?
I really loved it. I thought this was like a really great script from Chris Columbus. I think that Levinson directs this really precisely. It's very interesting to watch this in the prism of it being a Barry Levinson movie, because it doesn't have anything that I think is a distinctly Barry Levinson quality. It's just another. It feels maybe a little bit more like another studio for hire job, but he just like knocked this out of the park, where it was like he like showed what he can do technically, what he can do with tone, how he can direct children, what he can do with a heady plot. I think that he does it really well. I think the cast is really well done. I think that the main kids are all like really, really great child performances. I think the score by Bruce Broughton is like really under talked about. It's like John Williams-esque. It's like really, really good. I like really love the score for this. Yeah, I thought this was brilliant. I loved it. I had a great time with this movie.
No, this is very fun. This is a fun, I don't know if I was quite as high on it as you were, but I think this is a really fun little kids adventure movie. I would love a world where this, not to disrespect like the Goonies, but I would love a world where like this is like the movie that all the kids in 1985 loved, because I think this is just such a really fun, weird, well put together kids movie.
What really hurts is that this film is like really well done and really sweet and special and entertaining, and like sets up a whole franchise of telling us more Sherlock Holmes adventures and mysteries with these characters. And they're like, hey, we made it for really cheap. It's $18 million and it opens to $2 million. Like, it bombed. I don't really know why. Like, people saw Young Sherlock Holmes on the marquee and went, nah, I'm good. It like tanked. It barely made its money back. And they were like, yeah, we're never making another one of these, which is so sad, because I think that this movie could have absolutely been like one of the most fun, like, kids 80s franchises. There could have been a couple sequels to this, and all of them would have been pretty fun. And like, I do think this movie is actually probably one of the biggest reasons, this and Home Alone are probably the two biggest reasons why Chris Columbus got Harry Potter. I think like this is like one of the big, like, I think that Chris Columbus has at least proven to me that he can write a movie like pretty well. And like, I've actually like never seen Gremlins in its entirety, but that's another Chris Columbus script. So it's like, I from what I understand, good writer. So, and I like his directing from time to time. So I think that Chris Columbus is like, maybe probably, to me, I think it's the three-headed tandem where you have Spielberg producing this, and it definitely has that Spielberg charm. You have Columbus writing it, and it has that Columbus tone and feel of like Home Alone or Harry Potter. And then Levinson directing it is the one thing where I don't understand necessarily entirely what Levinson's vibe is, but whatever he did here, it worked and it clicked, and I really liked it. I think he threaded a needle. So
I think the through line between all three of Levinson's films that we've covered so far, and a few more, I think Levinson is one of the best directors at conveying nostalgia.
Sure.
Right? You look at Diner. Diner's an incredibly nostalgic film. It's clearly Levinson looking back at his early 20s. The Natural is Levinson. Even if you don't love The Natural as a whole, it's got this very nostalgic 30s feel.
It's a very Americana feeling movie.
And I think you can tell that Levinson loves the aesthetic and the environment that he has created. And I think that's the best part of the movie. Is the aesthetic and the environment. And I think here, it's another very nostalgic feeling movie. It feels, I mean, it is from the perspective of Watson looking back on his days as youth. And I think this movie just has a very like kind of nostalgic feel to it that really works.
Absolutely. I think that's a good point. I think that's the through line so far. And I wonder if the movies going forward that we see continue this trend. I know that like there's 3 more to his unofficial quadrilogy of Baltimore movies, but that we have to get to. But like also I wonder if maybe Rain Man feels that way. I wonder if maybe if like Bugsy I've seen and it has that look back quality, but maybe a little bit more cynical. So it's like that thing where it's like I wonder. We were talking about it. We're wondering what the hell happens to this guy that he falls off the cliff that he does in the late 90s and never recovers from. But I think it might have something to do with those movies that he makes abandons that nostalgia element that he has. Would be my early guess.
Well, you kind of set it up. The next film that we are covering is a film in Levinson's unofficial Baltimore quadrilogy. And this film is Tin Men, which I have seen and think way more people need to see this. But Koho, how do you think you're going to feel about Tin Men?
I have been sold by you pretty hard on Tin Men. So I'm looking forward to just seeing it and not being told that I need to watch it anymore.
That's fair.
So we'll see how it goes. I am excited to see Tin Men. I'm sure I'm going to like it.
That's fair. Before we go, 2 things I forgot we need to do. Number 1, who's your MVP for young Sherlock Holmes?
Oh, that's tough. I'm gonna go with Sherlock himself. I'm gonna go with Nicholas Rowe. I think he has the hardest job in this movie. He's squaring the sharpest circle. I think he's doing a great job. Yeah, I think he's my pick.
That is completely fair. I completely agree with everything you said. I'm going with Alan Cox as Watson. Alan Cox as Watson. I had a smile on my face anytime this kid said anything. I think he is like just the most fun part of this movie. I like him so much in this. Yeah. Now, of the 3 Levinson films that we've watched, Diner, The Natural, Young Sherlock Holmes, what is your ranking thus far?
I really don't know entirely which way I'm going to go, but I know The Natural is number 3. And I think if you said you need to watch either of these movies again, you have to gun to your head, you have to watch one again, what are you watching? I'm picking Young Sherlock Holmes. I think I like Young Sherlock Holmes slightly more than Diner. I think that Young Sherlock Holmes just really clicked with me in a way that I was not expecting. It hits that mystery element for me that I love. I really enjoy all the different elements of like, it feels a little bit like Harry Potter. It feels a little bit like a Sherlock Holmes prequel. It hits on all those elements for me. And it's really charming and sweet. And I don't think technically a Christmas movie, but it is a winter movie. That's for sure. So it's one that I could feasibly get away watching annually. So which matters to me a little bit. Like rewatchability matters to me. So I would say my number 1 is Young Sherlock Holmes. My number 2 is Diner.
That is fair. I get that, though, because in the same way that Diner is an incredibly Boatman movie, I think Young Sherlock Holmes is an incredibly Koho movie. But my 3 is The Natural, my 2 is Young Sherlock Holmes, and my 1 is Diner. And yeah, that was it for Young Sherlock Holmes. Be sure to tune in next week when Koho and I break down Tin Men with Richard Dreyfuss and Danny DeVito. Yeah, see you then.